a lot of people in Miami, and I can use Miami as a reference because we do work down there. A lot of people in Miami are very frustrated with the lifestyle in Miami, and it doesn't matter how glitzy and beautiful it is. They're frustrated with sitting in traffic for 3 hours.
Sure.
They're frustrated with the cost of living. They're frustrated with overcrowded schools. They're frustrated with, going to Chili's and waiting 3 hours to get in. It just starts to wear on you. And then you're not happy there, and you badmouth your own home, and you want to leave. So we've got to be very careful with those things that start doing that to a community. And I think transportation is a glaring issue for us.
I'm excited to tell you about our next guest. When I was in grad school, I had the chance to intern at what was then called the Tampa Bay Convention and Visitors Bureau. It was one of those experiences that changes everything. Not because of the work itself, though the work was incredible, but because of the people. That internship introduced me to the fabric of the Tampa Bay hospitality and business community, and it planted the seeds for what would eventually become Event Outfitters. So when I say I have a deep respect for the organization my next guest leads, I mean it. That place shaped me. Today, Visit Tampa Bay is one of the most effective destination marketing organizations in the country. And the person at the helm is someone who has made it his mission to tell Tampa Bay's story the way it deserves to be told. Loudly, proudly, and without apology. Santiago Corrada is the president and CEO of Visit Tampa Bay. He came up in the hospitality and tourism world with a resume that spans some of the biggest brands and markets in the industry, and he chose Tampa Bay. He chose this community, and the results speak for themselves. Record-breaking tourism numbers, a national profile that keeps rising, and a city that is finally being seen by the rest of the world the way those of us who live here have always seen it. Well, welcome, Santiago. It's so great to have you here. So take me back to the beginning. Tell me, where did you grow up? And was there a moment, even as a kid, where you understood the power of hospitality? Did you always feel like you could name what that was?
Yeah, we're going way back because I'm old. We're going way back. I was actually born in Paterson, New Jersey. My parents, both Cuban, but they did not meet in Cuba. They both immigrated to the U.S. for different reasons, but right around the revolution. My mom moved to New York City. My dad moved to New Jersey, and I was born there. It was a tough place to grow up. So I had to be the adult because I was the only one in the household that was fluent in the English language. So I was doctor, I was attorney, I was real estate agent. I would handle all the transactions. And they made one singular mistake. When I was 13, we went to visit family in Miami. And I said, okay, your businessman is not going back to New Jersey. We're moving to Miami. We got to move to Miami. And we actually did move to Miami when I was about 13. And then I did what normal kids do, right? I had a job at Burger King. So I learned hospitality in the fast food business. Then I worked at a barbecue place. And that was early on. But tourism was never really on my radar. I went to school, University of Miami. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree from the University of Miami. I started in education. I taught children with disabilities, elementary school, moved through the ranks, was a dissertation short of a doctorate when I moved to Tampa. But I had become a high school principal of a very tough high school in Miami. And the mayor and I had known each other before he was mayor and before I was the principal of this high school. So he becomes mayor, I become principal of this high school, and he recruited me to go work in his administration to run the city of Miami's Parks and Rec department. So I ran that big department for the city of Miami, and then lo and behold, we had a new mayor in Tampa, Mayor Iorio, and she was bringing in people from different walks of life, different parts of the country to really work with folks that had been here for a while. So it was a great mixture of new ideas, new perspectives with true Tampanians that had been here. And so worked for her for 7 out of her 8 years. And then Mayor Buckhorn came in and I became Mayor Buckhorn's chief of staff. And lo and behold, 13 years ago, I joined the team at Visit Tampa Bay. And if I thought I knew the power of tourism, I really know it now because I have actually seen what happens when you rebrand, when you get out there and you market and you sell, what can happen to a destination. And I always say Visit Tampa Bay doesn't own anything other than the brand and marketing, but we sure can drive the demand that then follows investment, right? When there's demand and people want to make money, then comes the investment. And that's literally what we've seen over the last decade or so.
So when the opportunity came to lead Visit Tampa Bay, what did that feel like? And was there any hesitation, or did you just know that that was the right next move for you?
I was the chief of staff for the mayor, so it's the highest non-elected position you can have. And being Latino, I was very proud of that because there weren't too many of us doing that kind of work. And when the opportunity came around, there was a big sense of familiarity for me with the team at Tampa Bay and Company back then, because I was the mayor's point person on the Republican National Convention. I had been involved in the Super Bowl bids for Mayor Iorio. I had run our convention center. So it was really a very easy transition. I knew the team at Tampa Bay and Company. I knew some of the business, but I knew we needed to evolve because it was a fantastic and very strong sales organization. I can't say that it was a strong marketing PR organization. So there was room for growth, room for evolving, and not diminishing the sales side of things because they were fantastic at it, right? Super Bowls, Republican National Convention, Shriners, military groups. So didn't want to do anything to mess with that, but I knew we were leaving some money on the table because in between those big events, we really weren't marketing to tourists or business travelers or anything. So it was good to be able to increase hotel revenue, increase our footprint, our visibility through marketing and PR.
So with all this different background you have, different roles, different challenges, which chapter of your career made you the leader that you are today? Is there a specific area you'd point to?
I'm glad you asked that because I think leadership sometimes is lacking. And leadership to me is a big package, right? There's education, there's experience, there's wisdom, there are opportunities. But I'm a dissertation short of a doctorate in leadership, and I can tell you what I learned at home and what I learned growing up as values and how you want to be treated transfer to leadership. Sure. So I want to say, probably, I've been a leader for a long time because I was middle school principal. I was a high school principal. I ran a department for the city of Miami. I've run departments for Tampa, been the mayor's chief of staff. I've done this. I've run the convention center. I think probably my role as an inner city high school principal really tested the limits of my leadership capacity, being a very young leader. When you're a very young leader and you're in a high school, and there's not a big difference between your age and the age of the students. And there might be a huge difference between your age and the age of the teachers because high school teachers stay. Sure. Right? I had high school teachers in that high school that had been teaching at that same high school longer than I'd been alive. Right? Because if you're talking about a young Latino principal, 32, 33, and you've had storied careers of teachers that have been teaching at the same school for 30 plus years, it's interesting, right? Because you're trying to mold young people and trying to connect with them and also trying to connect with individuals that have much more knowledge than you, much more experience. So you really have to value that and use that to your advantage. And so I think it really tested my limits. Poor school, a lot of violence, a lot of academic failure, just a lot of socioeconomic issues at hand, and trying to really balance all those things and make sure we survive to come back the next day was probably where I became the strongest leader that I have been, and those lessons have stayed with me.
Well, it's clear like how successful that has been. So a lot of people talk about this being Tampa's moment, and you've been here through the work, not just the celebration. Yeah. What were the days like before that momentum hit, and what kept you pushing when the narrative about the region wasn't as obvious as it is now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have PTSD, but I can tell you that when I left Miami, very dynamic downtown, we all know Miami, and I came to Tampa, I thought Tampa was just absolutely magnificent, but no one knew about it. And so I kept scratching my head, why is this great place not really known? And it was all about how do we elevate, but how do we also get the word out that we're pretty fantastic? And, developing a brand, getting out there, spending the money. A lot of people don't understand that it takes money to make money. It just does. When people talk about marketing, they say, well, we don't need to market because we have the sun and we have the water and we have the palm trees. I tell them, well, you know what? Tell Coca-Cola that. Because, I get to travel all over the world doing this job, and Coca-Cola is everywhere. And Coke Zero is everywhere. Yet, how much money does Coca-Cola spend marketing and branding their product? Because there's always someone who's going to be out there to take your business, to take your clients, to take your customers. So it was pretty daunting. I still remember when I left the city and came over to visit Tampa Bay, because we had started to change the name and the brand and everything. Landing the International Indian Film Awards, the Bollywood Academy Awards. And I remember there was a big trade show in Mumbai, and it was one of my first early international trips to go out and sell that we were hosting this humongous world event that had never been in the U.S., by the way. So we're in Mumbai, and we're at a trade show, and we've got our back then, our little table, because now, we've grown. So our booths are pretty fantastic. They win awards. They get a lot of attention. But back then it was a table and a pull-up. And I can't forget when people would come up to me and say, where in Miami is Tampa? And I thought, oh, my Lord, what have I got myself into? Because people in India think that Tampa is in Miami. And so there was a whole lot of work that went around building the brand, the exposure, the identification, using a lot of data, getting out there and understanding what people thought or didn't think about Tampa. And it was a blank slate, to be honest. There was nothing negative out there. There wasn't anything positive out there. It was just very neutral. So when you said Tampa, people were like, I don't really know that much about Tampa. Tell me about it. So it was a great way to develop a brand about who we are, the history, the culture, the food, the people. And then a lot of people were catching on to that because everybody wanted to be unique. And so, what's unique about palm trees in Florida, right? What's unique about coastline in Florida? And everybody started then focusing on what made them different. And I think we kind of started that.
So that's actually a perfect segue. So let's just talk about destination marketing for a minute and what a destination marketing organization actually does. Because I think most people don't fully understand that. Yeah. You're not just running ads. Walk me through what Visit Tampa Bay is really responsible for.
Well, initially, right, because we've morphed, initially it was to collaboratively produce economic impact through the traveler arena, the traveler industry. It was about bringing people here for conventions, for meetings, for events, and there were a number of ways to do that. When you think about how big the industry is, we can incentivize airlines to bring people here. We can incentivize cruise ships to be another attractor. We can incentivize groups and conventions to come, and you need a middle person to do that because of the way Tampa has grown in the industry field. We don't have big mega hotels where if you're bringing a convention, you use one or two hotels in the convention center and you're done. In many cases here, we're cobbling 10, 12, 16 hotels to accommodate a group. So you need a team to be able to get out there and bid on these events, bring them in, incentivize them. Heck, we're booking business right now out to 2038.
Wow.
Who knows if we're going to be around to welcome them, right, in 2038, but we're out there doing the work, making sure that funnel is full. So when you're out there, you're aggressively marketing back in the day, right, to bring people to the destination, expose the destination, bring them here in any way you can, because that drives the demand. And then these visitors are not just staying in a hotel and paying a hotel tax. They're out buying things. They're out dining. They're paying sales tax. They're paying our education tax. They're contributing. If those businesses are successful, the restaurants and the hotels, they're paying property taxes to the city and the county. They're providing jobs. So it's this whole symbiotic thing that a lot of people don't understand. And our work isn't here at home. Our work is in the exterior. Because if you're already here, we don't need to talk to you. You're already here. So we're out there in cities all over the country and cities all over the world. We're out there bidding on conventions. But, we've morphed. We've gone beyond that. We're involved in education now. We're involved in adopting high school programs in tourism and hospitality, raising money for scholarships, raising money for those teachers, making sure that there's a highway from the high schools to post-secondary education, whether it's UT or Hillsborough College or the University of South Florida. We've gotten involved in supporting the county in anti-human trafficking campaigns. We've gotten involved with the county to support economic development marketing, because if it's good enough for a visitor, it's good enough for you to move a corporate office here, business relocation, talent recruitment. So back in the day, it was really about the visitor industry, and now is so much more. We get involved in so much more because, we've talked about my background. I came out of city government with a broader perspective. I wasn't myopic when it came to we're just about hotels, we're just about this, no, tourism needs to be a part of the entire community, and that means education, advocacy, letting people know what we do so they don't start going anti-tourism, making them feel proud that we're hosting, this concert or that concert or this big event, this big convention, and getting people behind that and having them understand that it's good for all of us when these things happen here.
Well, and I guess most people, even if they don't think tourism impacts them in the state of Florida, the fact that there is tourism and this amount of tourism is why we don't have a state income tax, and that affects every single person, whether they realize it or not.
Well, you start with the state income tax. I think the only way we can even talk about property tax relief is because of tourism. Because someone's got to pay for police, somebody's got to pay for fire rescue, somebody's got to pay for road paving, somebody's got to pay for parks and rec, the things we expect from city and county government. But if there's no property tax to fund those things, somebody's got to pay for it, and we have to get the people here because it's competitive. I always say, we don't have a monopoly in tourism on anything, right? As a traveler, you can decide to go anywhere. You don't have to come here. Think about all your choices in the U.S. Think about all your choices abroad. No convention has to come here. No tourist has to come here. We have to get out in front of them and get them here. And so it's tricky because, again, some people believe that people are just going to show up here. I'm going to tell you they're not. I know they're not, because I've seen what's happened in other destinations. COVID was a great learning lesson, horrible learning lesson, but I think everybody learned the value of tourism and its impact globally when people just couldn't travel anymore, when people couldn't go anywhere. It really made us rethink a lot of things.
On that exact note, like post-pandemic, the rules of destination marketing have changed. People travel differently now. They want experience, not just a place to come to. How have you adapted Visit Tampa Bay's strategy, and what did you have to let go of that doesn't work anymore?
Yeah, again, this whole emphasis on the sun and the palm trees and the water and us being Florida and people just come here, I think it was getting away from that. And I'm proud that, 13 years ago when we rebranded and rethought how we were going to market and what our brand was going to be, it was about who we were and who we are, right? It was about the culture. It was about the history. It was about the food. It was about art. It was about our special place in Florida and in the country. We have a lot of history here, still tangible, visible history. When you look at a cigar factory, that's visual, tangible history. When you go into any of our historic districts, that's visible, tangible history. So we really wanted to get out of the box and talk about those kinds of things. And that was very unique back then. Now, have we continued to evolve? Absolutely, right?
Sure.
Just this past summer, I have a couple of dogs that I love very much. And I came into the office, and there's been many of these conversations. And I said to the team, people love their dogs, their animals. Maybe we can start a campaign around pets and travel to Tampa because we love dogs. And so they did. They came up, and the team is incredibly talented. They came up with the Doggone Days of Summer. And pet influencers, these dogs that have followers, think of this dog, talking on the Riverwalk. Think of this dog talking, sitting at Sparkman Wharf. These dogs were saying, we love being here. This is fantastic. And then, oh, by the way, we partnered with Amazon because they sell pet food. And, we were out there getting the word, and it was a smash hit. I mean, it was a smash hit. People really enjoyed it. We saw people visiting with their pets. We've done a lot of that. We were one of the first organizations to start marketing to individuals that may have some impediments to travel. because we said, we want to be about all people, right? All people means all people. It's not just race or gender, it's abilities, it's everything. So we were the first that started working with some ambassadors to really talk about accessibility and how you're welcomed here and you're made to feel comfortable here. So we've really done a whole lot of creative thinking. We've got involved with, sports teams and getting them to, in the UK, when we landed, which we were involved with, Virgin Atlantic flying into Heathrow, we said, well, what's cool around there that people that may be traveling to that airport can see visit Tampa Bay? Well, there's an arena there that has an English Premier League team called the Brentford Bees, and we wanted to be their U.S. destination sponsor. So, wow, here we go. You're flying over and you're looking at the pitch, and there's a big old Visit Tampa Bay logo in the middle of the pitch, right? So it was another way of branching out. We've done it through art. We've taken Tampa artists to the London Art Fair and taken over the London Art Fair and had these artists create Tampa art in London to entice the people in London to visit with us because we have art. This past year, we went back to the London Art Fair and we had a London-based artist come to Tampa to be inspired to go to the art fair and produce something that was representative of Tampa. So there are lots of ways to be very creative to market in unique ways.
That's awesome. So on the big event note, Tampa Bay has had some extraordinary moments on the national stage. Super Bowl, Stanley Cup run, RNC, as you mentioned. How do you leverage a moment like that without making your whole strategy dependent on the next big event?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? We try to capitalize ahead of the event. We capitalize shortly after the event, but they have a shelf life. And you have to, and since we're always moving, there's something else. Mm-hmm. April was a great example of that. We were able, with our friends at the Sports Commission, to bring in NBC's live telecast of English Premier League mornings on a weekend at Armature Works. We knew that there were most of the teams that play in the Premier League were going to have activations here. So we were looking at 15,000 people on both days to come down to Armature Works and be a part of this. And hotel occupancy went through the roof because we had a lot of people from out of the area. A third that came were from out of the area to that event. Then we followed that up with Varsity Cheer, where we had cheerleaders all over downtown. And then BTS had their Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday concert. So we can't pivot quick enough to go from one to the next to the next. So we don't really harp too long on any one thing because there's always something fresh right around the corner. It's like, oh, well, guess what? A few weeks we have both Shriners groups in town. We have Sigma Gamma Rho. We have the Soft Week, the military convention, which is international. They do the demonstrations behind the convention center. So really, we don't have a whole lot of time to stay on any one thing because there's always something big right around the corner for us. Gratefully, something big right around the corner because for other places that doesn't happen. They have to stick to, we hosted a Super Bowl 5 years ago. Well, we've had women's Final Fours, men's Frozen Fours, Shriners. You mention it in town, so we don't really stick to any one thing for too long. We can't.
It's really just so cool watching like that growth and seeing how that has come to be. Now, so Visit Tampa Bay operates in a public-private space, which means you're accountable to a lot of different stakeholders.
We are.
Hoteliers, local government, hospitality workforce, the community. How do you manage that complexity without losing your own vision in it?
I spent a lot of time on that. We're a 501c6. We're funded by the hotel collection that goes through county government. So it moves through government, but it's collected at a hotel. And then we raise private dollars as a not-for-profit.
Can we just explain that to people who don't understand? When they pay a bed tax.
Yeah, when you stay at a hotel, probably anywhere,
right?
And you look at your bill when you check out, there's some percentage added, and it could be listed as an occupancy tax, a room tax, a bed tax, a tourism tax. There are lots of different words that can be used for it, and there's usually a percentage of tax attached to your bill. In Hillsborough County, it's 6%. So whenever you stay at a hotel, a VRBO, Airbnb, RV park, you're paying that 6% on your overnight stay. The way it works, it's collected at those locations. It flows through government, and then by state statute, the uses are defined. So you can't use it for just anything because this was a tax that was voluntary many, many decades ago by the hotel industry to give back to their communities to continue to fuel tourism. So he said, listen, we could take this 6% to our bottom line, but we're not going to. We're going to give it back to our communities to continue to market, sell, and bring people in because we want the industry to grow. And we have already talked about sales tax and education tax and all these other taxes. So we want to help. And so by state statute, the uses are pretty clearly defined. So in Hillsborough County, that money's collected, goes through the county. We get a portion of it. We get approximately 40% of the entire collection. 1% goes to International Benchmark Arena. 1% goes to Raymond James Stadium. We may be having 1% go to the Rays. Who knows? However that turns out. And then we get 40% of the entire collection to do what we do, which in some cases means incentivizing events that happen at those arenas, those stadiums.
Sure.
So that money is reinvested in bringing more money in. So we get a portion, the 40% from that collection, and then we raise several $1 million on our own to supplement that money because it's expensive to market around the world. It's
Sure.
putting up billboards in London or wrapping trains in Chicago or wrapping a skyscraper in Boston costs money. It doesn't happen. Or having a commercial on Pandora or having a commercial on connected television costs money. So those dollars are reinvested in creating more money, and it's worked very, very well for us.
What's something Visit Tampa Bay is working on right now that you're genuinely excited about? Something that hasn't made the headlines yet, but you believe it's really going to matter?
Back to the question before, and I don't know if I answered it completely. Relationships are super important. At the office, I say we're relational, we're not transactional, and that means relationships at all levels. So we're engaged at issues at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, with electeds on issues that could affect travel and tourism. I can tell you that in that vein, I have a great board of directors. And a few years ago, when I first came to the organization 13 years ago, we did a huge strategic plan, rebrand, everything, top to bottom, sideways. We were relooking at the organization and how we were going to function. And just a few years ago, the conversation came up again, should we engage in a strategic plan? And this is what I'm really excited about because we have so many bright people around the table at the boardroom. They said, you've done the strategic plan thing. And the strategic plan thing is really an internally focused exercise. It's where the company's going, how the company's going to get there, goals, objectives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you do something more impactful than that? Because it's more than about Visit Tampa Bay. And the topic came up, which we're leading the way, and that's destination development planning, where we hired a third party to come in and do an inventory of all the tourism assets that exist in Hillsborough County and what's missing and where could that be built, because that's really important. That's very strategic. You don't want to make the same mistakes other cities have made in overdeveloping a certain product, and then there's cannibalization and people going out of business.
Sure.
So it's like, we don't want to do that. So this destination development planning, I think, is brilliant because it really has provided a roadmap for people to invest. And people are seeing it. They're looking at it because it lives and it breathes and it's constantly evolving. And I can't tell you how often I've had a developer say, we're looking at building a hotel there because you said in your development plan that we would do well there because there isn't a product like ours. Or, hey, this interactive theater show should happen in this part of town because you've said there's a need for entertainment there. So we're seeing people picking up this report and looking at it and saying, I want to invest in Tampa because you're telling us that people could still make money there and these are the things that are needed and we can put in. For example, before the JW Marriott and the addition, we were limited on luxury product.
Sure.
And we've seen that. We know that we have no resort in Hillsborough County. We have no resort. So is there room for a resort in Hillsborough County? Sure. Where's the best place to have a resort in Hillsborough County? That's why a very knowledgeable company has said, these are the places where that might work. And so it's having a broader impact than just staying in the lane and not thinking broadly about the future, because some of us are aging out. I was just having a conversation with someone and said, I've seen just about every position in Hillsborough County flip over my my 22 years here, my 23 years here. Everybody has flipped. I've seen everybody change, except Bob Rorlach at the chamber and myself. Everybody has changed. When you think about all the positions have changed. Superintendent, university presidents, mayors, art museum director, you name it, everybody's changed. So we're aging out, but we have to make sure we're protecting the future. And I think a destination development plan surely does that. It prepares you for the future and what might come. And it helps drive the right kinds of decisions too.
It's just really incredible because that's just such an incentive for development, knowing that the research has been done. And it's not like guessing.
No, right. Yeah. And we do need certain things that we don't have. I mean, when you think about the luxury product, it's limited, right? We don't have an Omni. We don't have a Lowe's. We don't have a Ritz. So is there room for that? Yeah. Where is the question? Where do you want it to land? Because do you need it right across the street from the Addition? Probably not. So you've got to make sure the product lands, because you don't want the Addition to have a problem, and you don't want this new property to have a problem. So it's really thinking ahead for them, trying to drive the right place.
So as a visible leader in the community, which means people project a lot onto you, what's something that people consistently get wrong about who you are and how you lead?
Oh, man. That's a great question. I think there's always a question about my hair. I think there's always a question about my shoes. And the answers are really easy. I'm very short, so I wear cowboy boots to get a little heel, because if not, I'm really short. And I hate the barbershop. My barber could never make any money off of me because I see him once a year, because I just can't sit in a chair for that long. I think people often wonder, well, what's with the hair and what's with the boots? But that's the simple answer. I don't know. You just never know what people think of you. I think what's really important is that you get to a place in your life where you kind of don't care. You know who you are. Mm-hmm. You know what you've done. You know what you're all about. It takes too much effort to get everybody to believe that.
Sure.
So you just lead by example. You're consistent. I always say the Santiago you see today is the Santiago you'd have gotten 20 years ago. It's the Santiago you're going to get 20 years from now. Don't plan on changing my behavior. Don't plan on changing my attitude. So I think people question that. I think there's always confusion until they hear Santiago, what my background is. Corrada can be tricky. So is he Italian? Is he Spanish? But I think, because I've been around for a while, I think most people know what to expect. They know that I'm going to be meticulous about getting the job done. They know, I'm going to leave it all on the field. And they know I'm a competitive person who believes in Tampa being number one. It'd be hard for me to be able to try to do this somewhere else where I don't believe that. Right. And I really believe that. I think Tampa has been very good to me. The people here were welcoming. I was worried, coming out of Miami, how people in Tampa might react to that. And it was wonderful. And I was allowed to contribute, which sometimes doesn't happen. I lived in Miami just a few years longer than I've lived here, and I never felt the sense of ownership in Miami that I feel here. Like I can see things and say, I had a part in that. I was allowed to have a part in that. I was allowed to help build Curtis Hickson Park. Mm-hmm. I was allowed to be able to help build the Art Museum. I was allowed to shift the Gasparilla Parade into downtown away from Channelside. I did a lot of those things, and that's because I was granted that opportunity.
We've had a lot of people actually mention that Tampa is so welcoming to people, unlike pretty much any other large city.
It's amazing. It's really, really amazing that you're welcome that way, and you're allowed to be a part. Sometimes you're welcomed and you're just not allowed to do anything. Like, yeah, we're glad you're here. Just stay over there. But here, you're in it, and you're allowed to voice an opinion, give feedback, try something new, or try something that you don't want to try because you tried it somewhere else and it didn't work. Right. I can't tell you how many times I say, we kind of tried that in Miami and it didn't turn out so well. So maybe that's not what we want to try unless things have changed and we think we can pull it off. So I think it's an amazing place. I often say it. And I get to visit a lot of different cities, a lot of different destinations. And after I'm there for a few days, I want to come home. It's like I've had enough. I don't care how great everybody thinks this city is. I want to get back home.
10 years from now, what does Tampa Bay look like if everything goes right? And what do you think your role is in making that happen?
We've got some issues we have to deal with. Transportation is a glaring problem. It's getting worse and worse. we had a lull with COVID, and I think we kind of said, oh, it's not that bad. But yeah, go out there today. It's that bad. It affects how people feel about where they live. A lot of people in Miami, and I can use Miami as a reference because we do work down there. A lot of people in Miami are very frustrated with the lifestyle in Miami, and it doesn't matter how glitzy and beautiful it is. They're frustrated with sitting in traffic for 3 hours.
Sure.
They're frustrated with the cost of living. They're frustrated with overcrowded schools. They're frustrated with, going to Chili's and waiting 3 hours to get in. It just starts to wear on you. And then you're not happy there, and you badmouth your own home, and you want to leave. So we've got to be very careful with those things that start doing that to a community. And I think transportation is a glaring issue for us. We've talked about workforce housing. We've talked about affordable housing that people can live in a decent way. I think that will become more and more of an issue. And, we've got to build the infrastructure to handle the growth. And we were at a forum recently. People saying, it's coming. I'm like, no, it's here. Let's not keep talking about Tampa's greatest days are ahead of us. No, Tampa's greatest days are now. Let's not keep, cutting ourselves short and saying, we're going to be the next great American city. We're going to be the next. No, it's already here. When Time Magazine names you a few years ago, one of the greatest places on earth, the 50 greatest places on earth. And in the U.S., they mentioned like 4 of us, and only we were a city. That's saying a lot. That's saying a whole lot about our day is here. Yes, you continue to evolve. You keep raising the bar. You keep going higher and higher. But we're pretty great already. And I think a lot of people have figured that out. And so this congestion, this growth, smart growth, I think our mayors have been brilliant, and our county leaders about downtown infill. When I moved here, we had no residential living downtown. We had no residential living in Channelside. We had none of it. And you've seen how that's evolved. We didn't have a midtown. It's crazy to say we've added all these places where people can live.
Right.
And so being smart about how that all develops, and we've got some great projects on the drawing board. Water Street's not finished, Gasworks, Ybor Harbor. I mean, what's the next phase for West Shore? There's so many opportunities, but we've got to figure out the congestion issue, the housing issue. That's for other people, but it affects what we do, because word of mouth is important in our industry. Somebody says, I was at Tampa, and it took me 5 hours to get from. It hasn't happened, but it took me 5 hours to get from the airport to the convention center. That's a problem, right? That we have to overcompensate for. So all of those quality of life things, if it's a dirty city, if it's a blighted city, if it's a crime infested city, if there's graffiti, I'm a stickler for all that stuff. If I'm getting off a ramp going into Ybor City for a meeting and I see trash or I see graffiti, I'm calling somebody like, hey, this is our historic district. I'm drawing people there. I'm telling them to visit, and I don't like the way it looks.
Right.
And so I think all of us have to be about that, because this prosperity can go away really, really fast. Really fast.
You mentioned the housing. So the generation of young professionals that are in the region are watching what's going on. And what do you want them to understand about this place? Not the marketing version, but like the real version of Tampa.
Yeah, I think for young people, it's become a very exciting place. And again, it's all these pieces fitting together. The nightlife, the living spaces. I was having a meeting in Water Street yesterday, and I was like, this is a different Tampa. I'm sitting there and looking through the window, and I am seeing young people, and I'm seeing the folks with the dogs, and in their fitness gear, and the beautiful people that are walking around. I'm thinking, wow, it can happen, right? You build the space, and it can happen. And we have to keep building that space, those jobs, the excitement that attracts young people. When I worked for Mayor Buckhorn, he kept talking about bringing our young people back. They go off to school, they don't want to come back. I don't think that's a problem anymore. I say it in the office all the time. When you're on top, there's only 2 things that can happen. You're going to stay or you're not. And if we want to keep that excitement, we have to keep building for that interest. What interests a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old is very different than what interests a 60-year-old. So we have to make sure that we're building for the audience we want to have here. And I think that's critically important.
If you had to name one thing Tampa Bay has that no other destination in the country can replicate, what is that?
I'm going to say the people, and I've heard Mayor Castor say it often. We've hosted a lot of mayors in town, and they ask her what they could take back to make their cities great. And she says, nothing, because it's our people that make it great. And before we had all these cool things, it was the people. We kept talking about, you're going to like coming to Tampa because the people are so nice. You're going to want to come here. So I would say the people, but there's so much. I mean, when you talk about our history, that immigrant story of what made Ybor City, when you talk about, how well people got along here historically speaking, for the most part, right? We all have our issues now and then, but when you talk about those immigrants that were working shoulder to shoulder, living in communities together, coming here to find a better way of life, we have that story to tell, and it continues for us in the way we market. We want everyone to come and enjoy the place we love. And so I think into the future, it's really being very, very meticulous about what we represent and how we behave. Because I always say, I don't see that issue in Tampa. When people bring up something about coming here for some reason, that's not really our issue in Tampa. We don't have that going on. And we've been very fortunate because, like I said, when the genie gets out of the bottle, it's hard to get the genie back in. And if we start going down a slippery slope like some other cities and communities have gone down, it's really hard to reclaim your place. We've seen it. We've seen communities that have had racial discord or issues that have made it into national and international headlines, and then how hard it is to get that removed.
Sure.
Once it's out there, it's really hard.
So when you hand this all off someday, when your chapter of Visit Tampa Bay is done, what's the one thing you want the next person to find already built? What's the legacy you're most committed to leaving?
Oh, wow. God, your questions are very thought-provoking. I would say you always, again, back to some of the people I've worked with and the things they say, you want them to find the place in a better shape than you found it. So you're constantly trying. And again, for, the leadership at Tampa Bay and Company was very good leadership. So it's not about making it better than it was. It's about how times change. How do you continue? Digital marketing wasn't around back in the day when you would place an ad in a magazine, right? That's all they had, a magazine, a newspaper, a billboard, 3 television stations, whatever it was back in the day. So things have really, really changed. So I want to hand it off in a way that somebody can come in and make their mark, obviously put their fingerprints on it, but it's comfortable. They're walking in and they're not having to rebuild. They're not coming in and having to develop a reputation, a brand, a credibility. You want to pass it off in a way that someone's going to say, wow, the people here really did a great job of nurturing. Now, a lot of people won't do that because they'll come in and say, oh, it's terrible, I can make it better, blah, blah. We know human nature. But you hope to leave it in a way that the people who come in and inherit it will say, honestly, sincerely, wow, this place was left in a great financial position. They've got great team members. I want to put my mark on it, my personality on it, my leadership style on it, but I don't have to redo everything. And I think that's the best we can do, right? Is to leave places in good shape. You always try to leave the place in good shape, and you don't want to blame your predecessor for anything. I've never done that. I've always walked in and said, you know what? This is a great place. I'm not here to cause any trouble, but the times change.
Sure.
And we have to get out in front of it, and we have to change with the times, and we have to make sure that we're elevating. I mean, when I took over, we have the graphs and the numbers to show it. Back in 2013, hotel taxable revenue in Hillsborough County was $423 million. And our budget was $8 million, and the tourism collection was $23 million. Did we want to stay there? No. Fast forward last year, $1.2 billion in change hotel taxable revenue. Our budget is close to $30 million, and the bed tax collection is over $72 million. And that's what I mean about moving forward and progressing and leaving it in good shape. You don't want somebody to come in and say, what have they been doing here for the last 20 years? They're still sitting at 423 million and still at $8 million budget. And what's happened? So really, it's that forward progress. It's not being critical of anybody. I would never be critical about anybody's leadership style, what they did. I wasn't there. I don't know the circumstances. I just know that I'm here and I know the circumstances that I'm being faced with now. And how am I going to deal with that?
So our last few questions, we ask the same questions to everyone. We call it the lightning round. So the first one is, what would you say is your hype song or like your walk-up music if you were to pick a song?
Lord, that is such a great question.
Or if you're like firing yourself up to go into a meeting, that you would play for yourself to be ready for that.
Yeah, I love music. So there's going to be like a lot of them, right? Everybody knows I'm a big Kiss fan. I have a huge Kiss collection, one of the biggest Kiss collections in the world. So I love when they use Kiss music for my walk-up music, right? Whether it's God of Thunder or some crazy Kiss song, Rock and Roll All Night Party Every Day, one of those songs. But, I'm often inspired by songs of, victory, like Queen, We Are the Champions, or some of those songs that can really get you hyped up to go in and perform at your very best. So I would say songs like that. Not any one, because we just had our National Travel and Tourism Week luncheon, and they picked Kiss Rock and Roll in the USA because it was America 250. So again, I think upbeat songs. I really like upbeat songs that talk about overcoming and being victorious. Those kinds of songs inspire me.
Love that. So now this may be tricky for you in your position, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is your current favorite Tampa Bay restaurant?
Oh, wow. I'm very partial to the Columbia, and there's a story behind it. When I was 15 years old, I had a very, very good friend, and we're friends to this day, who was a big soccer fan. And he and his dad were Argentinian soccer players, and we were playing the Tampa Bay Rowdies. The Fort Lauderdale Strikers were playing the Tampa Bay Rowdies in Tampa. And as a 15-year-old, we came to the game. I came to the game with my friend and his father, and we went to the Columbia. And I was 15 years old, and I was just blown away. I had never seen anything like that. And to this day, the 1905 salad is one of my favorites. The salteado is one of my favorites. So I have to say, if I'm ever in the mood for my favorite restaurant, it has to be the Columbia, only because, and there's so many great restaurants in Tampa, it's so hard to say what's my favorite. I was just at Boulogne yesterday for a meeting, and I love their crab cake, whatever things that I had. It was phenomenal. Blue crab croquettes. But yeah, I would say the Columbia is one of my favorites, only because of that experience, and I've never forgotten.
What a great memory.
Yeah, I was blown away by the brick streets, and the Columbia can be very dramatic for a young person to walk in and to see that kind of artwork and that history, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I had to pinch myself when I came to Tampa to live, and I could go there all the time because it was a one-time experience as a 15-year-old from Miami. And I was just blown away by it.
That's awesome. And then finally, what is the best business gift you've ever received?
People know about my Kiss obsession, so I get some Kiss stuff, and I always love Kiss stuff. Whether I have 10 copies of the one thing, it's fantastic. It's either something around, the rock group Kiss or the University of Miami, which are two of my passions. As you know, I've always, on our ReliaQuest board meetings, I'm always the Miami guy who's out of a place. But I've gotten some nice gifts around the University of Miami and Kiss that I love. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Santiago, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
really
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
and your interest in what we do.
Thank you.
Because what we do doesn't happen here. It happens externally. Our billboards are not here. Our commercials don't show here. Our investments, some people don't ever know that we invest in airlines, in cruise ships, in big groups coming to town. That outdoor hockey game was a big investment for us. So thank you for the opportunity to share with whoever's listening that, what we do is really important for everything because it's connected to everything we do.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Santiago. That conversation was exactly what the Bay Builds is built for. Real talk with the people who are doing the work, not just talking about it. Santiago has spent years making sure Tampa Bay is seen the way it deserves to be seen, and this episode is proof that the story behind the story is just as compelling as the results. This one was personal for me. That internship at what is now Visit Tampa Bay is part of how I found my footing in this community all those years ago. And in a very real way, it's part of how Event Outfitters came to exist. Getting to dig into the organization through the lens of the person leading it now is something I won't forget. If you want to learn more about Visit Tampa Bay or plan your next trip to one of the best cities in the country, head to visittampabay.com. And if this episode resonated with you, share it. That is how we keep this community growing. I'm Tracie Domino. This is The Bay Builds, and we will see you next time.